It's the final week of the month. You know what that means. It's style study time. And today we are doing a study that, no lie, has been 3 weeks in the making. And I got really ill. This was so hard, my body was physically rejecting it. But that's why we gotta do it. We do hard things so we can be better artists. Today we are learning from the work of legendary artist Huang Guangjian. I'm totally kidding, by the way. It was just a cold and a fever. It's all good now. I'm getting better each day. This video was requested 4 separate times, and I have all your names here on the back of a yarn label because I'm a professional like that. So thank you so much to UU_8, Obama Digital 5239, Loki XIII 4942, and ETAM1343 for requesting this video. You guys really need to start putting your legal names on these YouTube accounts to make my life easier. But thank you so much for requesting this video. I hope you guys will love it and that it's everything you've been looking for. If you're a style study veteran, thank you so much for coming back. I'm so grateful you're still here and you're still enjoying this series. But if this is your very first style study, hi, welcome. My name is Srish and I'm so glad you're here because today we're going to level up your art by like 1,000,000%. Style study is a regular series we do here on my channel where we take a look at some of our favorite contemporary artists, analyze their work and see what we can learn from it. Keyword, learn. We're not here to plagiarize anyone's work or copy their style. We're simply here to learn some really cool art tips and tricks and see how we can apply them to finding our own unique art style. I usually structure my style studies in 3 parts. In part 1, we'll take a look at Huang's work, analyze his style and see what we can learn from it. Part 2 will be a study of one of his original paintings. The absolutely stunning reference that I chose today was this one. And trust me, studying this taught me more than any of the analysis. So make sure you stick around for that bit. And in part 3, we'll apply everything that we learned today to an original painting of our own. If you enjoyed this video and learned something today, make sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more style studies in the future. Comment below your biggest takeaway from the study and come say hello on socials. All my links are in the description. And now if you're ready, grab a snack, sit back, and let's dive into another style study featuring Huang Guangjian. Huang Guangjian, I'm just going to call him Huang for our purposes today, is a digital artist and oil painter from Fuzhou, China. In an interview with The Design Inspiration, he mentioned how he actually studied finance and worked as an accountant for a bit, but eventually went back to his childhood love of art and studied digital art in Hangzhou. This led to him working as a concept designer in the video games industry, as well as eventually teaching art. Huang's stunning work has garnered him over 63.1 thousand followers on Instagram and over 74.9 thousand followers on ArtStation. Huang paints these textured, very traditional looking character pieces that have rich, dramatic values and colors and also just a lot of dynamism. Like, no matter what the subject matter, there is a lot of movement, a lot of fast-paced leading lines and curves. These are very much fantasy scenes with an almost fairy tale mythological storytelling style, but the compositions are grand and extremely detailed. It really feels like stepping through a portal into a whole other world. In fact, in that very same interview, Huang mentioned how he is constantly looking to learn more and do better with his art. And you can see that tendency towards perfectionism in all the tiny elements peppered around each painting. Huang is definitely a scrupulist. Speaking of lists, here are 4 key characteristics to Huang's art. The first thing about Huang's work that will hit you right in the face is all that texture. Oh god, there is so much texture, and it genuinely feels like you could reach out and feel it under your fingertips. And I'm not talking about the uniform noise, which we will come to in just a second, but rather all that chunky textured brushwork you see in the hair and the background. What's interesting is that Huang actually paints tiny little sections and strands of hair, often making it look very straggly and wispy at the end, especially with curly or wavy hair. And these textured ends are immediately surrounded by even more texture. In fact, it's like the lighting and texture of the background gradually bleeds into the hair itself. This creates two very interesting effects. First, the scraggliness of the ends makes the hair look rather messy, not in like an unkempt way, but rather it tells you that this character has been moving around, doing fast-paced stuff that involves their hair being a little frazzled. Like, these aren't pretty characters whose primary function is to look good, these are active characters whose appearance isn't their main concern at all times. Second, having the texture of the hair blend into the texture of the background makes these characters seem right at home in their surroundings, like they are exactly where they're meant to be, doing exactly what they're meant to do. In either case though, the texture appears to be the main source of movement in these paintings, particularly in pieces like this one, where the character is actually rather static. Like, it is just a 3/4 view of the head, but do you see how the tiny little brush marks in the hair, beard, and background make it so much noisier, so much more dynamic? One of my absolute favorite details is this super thick paint that he'll place here and there, and they actually serve a very specific purpose. I'm not just talking about all the brushwork, but this specific kind that has thickness, that looks like a very heavy bit of paint that has been sculpted onto the canvas. And Huang uses this type of brushwork in two distinctive ways, depending on the sizes of these shapes. First, there's the impressionistic details, where instead of literally painting the texture of something in uniform detail, he uses thick paint to kind of create the illusion of a lot of detail. So he'll paint fairly low contrast, fairly abstract midtones and shadows, and then lay on super thick, super sharp highlight tones to mark edges and raise texture. Instead of doing a uniform pass of medium sharpness, he splits the texture into blurry and super sharp details. That's what gives us a very traditional effect, because this is something the old masters did with oil paints on canvas to increase the readability of their values and make details look a lot more intricate than they actually were. It's magical, honestly. The other way in which Huang uses this thick brushwork is to break up large areas of low contrast. So here, for instance, all these greens and greys in the background don't really have much detail, and the skin in that shadowy area is super low contrast as well. So throwing in these super thick brush strokes that really catch the light without much changing the values or saturation around that area really helped to create a lot more interest in the background, and it almost acts like a bridge between the super detailed bright skin and the super abstract, nearly flat background. It's very consciously thought out, and that's what makes Huang so insanely good at what he does. He does it consciously. Let's now talk about the skin, because in many ways it is almost in direct opposition to the textures and noise that we just looked at. In fact, this is exactly the kind of compositional choice you see in a lot of really good, well-balanced artwork, because all of that noise acts as a chaotic frame to drive your eye to the visually quiet focal point, i.e. the skin. You'll notice that Huang paints skin that almost looks like porcelain, especially on the prettier, more feminine characters. But unlike actual porcelain, it does look rather lively and warm. So while yes, the vast majority of his characters have very pale skin, it is all still vibrant with pinks and oranges. However, the desaturation of those shadows is what creates that almost unrealistic marble look. Why? Because even in the shadows, most human skin shows some form of warmth and natural light as subsurface scattering, if nothing else. Yes, he paints subsurface scattering around the facial features like the nose and ears, and also on the body like you see here in the fingers, but it isn't consistent across the shadows, especially in the form shadows of the face. It kind of messes with your head a little because the lighting scenario feels unrealistic and almost ethereal. What further pushes that porcelain look though is the texture, or lack thereof. This was a bit of a conundrum because the skin looks super smooth like marble, but then you look closer and the skin also has a lot of texture. Until I realized the one trick that allows for both these possibilities to coexist. The texture is an illusion. Look at this piece, specifically at the nose, cheek and jaw area where the different tones of the skin lie. If we ignore the texture noise, there are virtually no visible edges due to the brushwork itself. All the colors blend into each other pretty much seamlessly. Same here with the skin on her face, chest and even leg. If we put the noise aside, the vast midtones and transitions are all very smoothly blended. There's subtle color variations, but so many transition tones in between that really smooth out those color shifts. The texture is actually an overlay, likely a mix of A, little bits of a grungy texture image set to a blending mode, and then B, a uniform noise or grain filter applied over top of that. The texture in the skin isn't like the background, i.e. it doesn't come from brushwork and hard edges, it is overlaid on top of very smoothly rendered skin. Why do this? Well, like we saw, we want the skin to be a visually quiet focal point that balances out all that noise from the hair, clothing and background. However, a good painting doesn't just have balance, it also has harmony. As you look across a painting, you want every element to feel coherent with every other element, even if there are big visual differences. And while it is pretty hard work to really nail either balance or harmony, doing them both really well in the same piece is exponentially tougher. I'm telling you guys, this man's a genius with paint. So we've established that 1, there's a lot of texture in the background hair and just the elements that frame the visually quiet skin, and 2, though the skin has color variations, it is mostly muted and very smooth. In fact, you'll see that the vast majority of the canvas does tend to be fairly low contrast and low saturation, but then there's these super saturated pops of color. You'll usually see this in the same elements that have all the texture, i.e. everything but the very smooth skin, but it's these relatively small shapes that really hold a lot of visual weight. Like here, that teal glow around the headdress is a very bright pop of color, and then there's secondary elements with some saturation like the sword, the wand, and that lilac fabric. They're not quite as visually heavy as that teal glow, but they still carry a lot of visual weight in comparison to how little space they take up on the canvas. Here, that super saturated goldfish has a very small area that is actually really orange, but it catches your attention immediately. And then there's the neon bubbles that are even smaller, but also very eye-catching. But if the face and skin are meant to be the primary focal point, why would Huang want to distract us with these other saturated elements? Well, my friend, it's because all that skin is like a black hole. It is so visually quiet that it absorbs your attention entirely and can keep you stuck in one place on the painting. Those pops of saturation, however, pull your eye around the entire composition, almost forcing you to take in all aspects of the piece. It keeps you engaged in the painting for much longer because you're darting across the various elements and taking in the entire, very dynamic story, as opposed to staying stationary on the character and then getting bored and moving on. See? Nothing about Huang's work is ever random. It is all very carefully thought out and indeed very purposeful. Alright, now we can dive into my favorite part of Huang's work, all that metal. Whether it's jewelry, armor, or weaponry, Huang always paints the metallic elements to be very intricate and ornamental. In other words, these are painted to appear more aesthetically pleasing than functional. Like here, this headpiece might help protect the sides of this guy's face, but the shapes and design details are definitely more for visual appeal than anything else. Here, although the armor serves its protective purpose, the sheer amount of pieces, the shape language, that skull detail on the shoulder, it isn't just purposeful, it is ornate. This intricacy in the metalwork suggests an almost regal essence in each of these characters. Like, they aren't just knights, they are decorated knights. They aren't just women, they are celebrated women. Now, let's look at the compositional aspects of these metallic details. First, of course, these metallic elements add lots of small shapes that break up that visually quiet skin. Just like with the pops of saturation, these small shapes help keep your eyes moving across the piece, especially in the paintings where there's a lot of visible skin or just large, smooth shapes in general. But if you look at how these intricate elements are painted, you'll see that, just like with all the other textures, there's an illusion there. If we zoom in here, for instance, and look at most of the metal, especially the bits that are in the shadow, we see that they're not even really rendered with that much detail. It's a lot of low contrast, low detail values, very abstract. But in the bits that get hit by the key light, it's a whole other story. Here you'll see a lot of very sharp detail, extremely high contrast between highlights and shadows, and tiny shapes that spell out every single part of the design. In fact, he even doubles down by sharpening up these details with a sharpen tool. Like, these areas are really crisp. As the viewer, however, you won't even notice these two very distinct styles of rendering because your mind is looking for connections. So what you see is one large metallic element where the super sharp and super abstract details sort of average out in your mind. And just like with the skin, just like with the textures in the background, this is yet again an illusion. And to all of this, he adds ambience effects. So you'll see this glow right around the brightest area of highlight in the metal, which not only punches up the shine of the metal, but it also makes you subconsciously think that the air right around that area is heavy or dense. Boom, ambience. And then there's the insane amount of color variation, like here where you see the reflections of blues, greens, and reds in the shadowy areas of that gold armor. All that metal is reflective and it is mirroring the colors of the objects directly around it. Boom, even more ambience. I told you guys, this guy is a genius. He thinks of every single detail and, more importantly, translates them all to optical illusions. It is a whole other level of craft, like my mind can't even really comprehend it. So, to sum up part 1 of this study, here are 4 key characteristics to Huang Guangjian's art. Number 1, there's a lot of textured brushwork and abstraction in the background and the character's hair and accessories that act as the primary dynamic element in any scene. 2, the skin is painted to be very smooth and the many desaturated shadows create a look of porcelain. However, the warm variety of colors still keep it looking alive. 3, little pops of saturation and elements around the character help guide the eye around the composition, letting the viewer take in the entire story. And number 4, the metallic elements are primarily ornamental as opposed to purely functional, and one paints this almost illusion of super sharpness and reflectivity that makes the metal look a lot more detailed than it really is. For our study today, I struggled to find a reference image that exemplifies this style best, but also wasn't so complex that I couldn't keep up. So I ended up with this reference, which is stunning and easily one of the hardest, most confusing studies that I've ever done. And deceptively so, because surprisingly enough, the sketch was extremely simple. You see, the sketch portion is when I put down the important large shapes that have very clearly defined edges. And under all that beautiful lighting and color and texture, this is a very simple, very uncomplicated portrait. And that's the lure of this style, I think. It is that despite all the ornamental details and the drama, at the very core of it, these are just humans. And it really isn't much later in the process that the super dramatic details even come in, because as you can see, the base tones are very much neutral and desaturated for the most part. Even that pop of green that looks super loud against the background, if you were to take it in isolation, it is actually very dark and desaturated. I'll keep drilling this in for you. This style is all about illusions. For the base values, I actually went straight in with an airbrush because, quite frankly, I didn't trust myself to blend everything out later. That texture is too tempting, and yes, I did start out way too saturated, and that was intentional, because when I do another translucent pass over these saturated tones with a much more neutral color, that pop of warmth is going to peek through the neutral layer, giving us the illusion of depth. It's a skill I learned way back in the Shell E style study, and it still serves me well to this day. I'm gonna be honest, that neck and shoulder area was a pretty big challenge just because of the low contrast but visible shapes and such, so it was something I had to keep going back to as the piece came along. Painting that eye, oh my god. Okay, so here's the thing. This is a style that relies on built-up layers. The end product that you see is nothing like the first brush strokes he puts down, and that is incredible, and it creates a beautiful piece with depth and layers. It is also extremely hard to study, and the eye is a great example of why. You see how there's those shadowy areas in the lash line and the eyelid? Well, there's also a lot of really light, grainy noise that breaks up that shadow, making it look lighter than it is. But the noise goes on at the end, so while rendering the values and colors in the first place, it's like playing 4D chess, where you have to also anticipate what the piece will look like with the grainy noise on at the end, and therefore adjust the values to that, while you also adjust it to be close to the reference. Your girl was stressed, okay? That's the bottom line. Thankfully, the skin in general was much easier to get down, and that is probably my favorite nose that I've ever painted. I refined the pectoral area some more, and this is where I realized just how much of that green is reflected onto her skin. It's actually really cool because it's like that green isn't just a background element like a tree or an object, but rather it's a sort of glowy secondary light source. Like it tints a lot of the character, but you really only see it in the shadowy areas that the primary key light doesn't reach. The shadow side of the face was also rather tricky because it like borderline blends right into the background, but when you look at it, there's a very distinctive eye, eyelid, and eyebrow over there. But it is low contrast, so definitely a mini challenge in and of itself. At this point, I decided to just go ahead and paint the background in because I need that as a frame of reference for the hair. The upper edges of her head, as I'm sure you can see, blend right into the background, so I really wanted to put the underlayers in place first. Oh dude, it's been some time since I've used so many texture brushes. I even downloaded a new brush pack. It's this one, I'll link it below, it's free and it has some stunning metallic textures, but it helped me create lovely shapes for the background as well. Okay, now for the real challenge, the hair. This is very, very, very tricky because just like with the eyes, there's that noisy overlay that lightens things up and makes the edges all abstract. But then there's these strands of hair that are light at the edges but dark in between. And also there's like no sectioning for the overall head, nor are there clear edges for the silhouette. So it was really difficult to figure out where she ended and the background textures began. So instead, I figured, hey, what if instead we use that metallic rose thing that's in her hair as a landmark? I'm gonna be honest, this was my favorite part. Painting that metal by hand was strangely therapeutic that day. You know I'm not a fan of painting flowers. Turns out if they're made of gold, I'll happily paint them for hours. Consumerism, hey? It was honestly just an entire evening spent hand painting each color and shape as I saw in the reference, but again, bearing in mind the brighter overlays that come in later. And it worked like a charm. With that flower in place, it was so much easier to place the rest of the jewelry as well as the rest of her hair. See, this is why I love developing an artistic instinct. It'll help you problem solve like no other. The jewelry was still confusing, like those tiny shapes are super abstract, especially in places where they're overlapped by hair, but at least now I knew where they were meant to go, so there is that. Alright, final stretch. I spent a lot of time further refining the skin, painting in that tiny Captain America shield looking gold button that's by her sternum, smoothing out that pectoral area some more. I told you it was a challenge and I kept having to go back there. I then went about making all the edges abstract and painting on some super grungy texture, especially above the head and such. I duplicated a painting and hit it with a sharpen filter, then masked the whole thing out. Then I only masked back in the eye, the jewelry, and some of the hair and the background that needed to be extra sharp. And finally, we have a finished study. I swear this one aged me. What do you think? For the original painting this week, I had this idea of a two-person piece, except one of the people is a marble statue. I wanted it to be a narrative of how we sometimes fall in love with certain ideals, even though they're completely unreal and often also unhealthy. I don't know, something about this style made me want to paint a sad scene. I went with an overall cool toned grey-blue palette because I wanted our character to be the warm element, and I started by texturing the background in this time because it helped establish a palette for the values and such. Then I went in to super saturate our character. Again, having that much colour in the underlayer means that when we put a muted overlay on top, some of that colour will peek through and give us that depth and skin-like feel. I ended up going rather green with the key light. I feel like it added a really cool sort of death glow. And then I textured the visible hair. As I'm sure you can tell, the veil was a bit of a cop-out. I mean, yeah, I wanted it to be a symbol of like mourning and such, but it's definitely also a convenient way for me to not have to paint that much super textured hair. Look, you gotta make your own life easier, no one else is gonna come do it for you. And sometimes that means painting a veil so you don't have to paint a lot of hair. It is just the way things work around here, I'm sorry. But with the hair that is visible, I did make sure to give it that stringy, super textured look so it wasn't extremely soft or perfect. With the jewelry, I'd initially thought of painting these golden square things around the border of the veil, and then this super heavy neck piece and such, but after rendering it about halfway, it just wasn't quite feeling right. It was too structured, so I decided to shift focus and come back to it later. Painting the marble was super fun, though it is definitely one of those materials where you have to trust the process, because it really won't look like marble for the vast majority of the rendering, but then once you get to the point where you can blur out the midtones and shadows, then hit it with a super sharp glossy highlight, suddenly it's like you can touch the cold, smooth surface. I decided to just do away with the gold jewelry and instead create this grey silvery thing full of very abstract midtones, but then some sharp details right up top where the key light would hit. It's literally just scribbles, but adding that tiny bit of definition right at the high points somehow makes the whole headpiece look well designed. I told you, it's all illusions and it's really freaking cool. Also, random side note, these are easily the nicest hands I've ever painted, and I couldn't possibly tell you why. I don't know if it's the rendering or the low contrast or the colors, but they turned out so elegant and graceful looking. I have no idea why, and it really bothers me when I can't analyze something, because it means I can't consciously replicate the steps. It's not scientific, and that bugs me. Anyway, I hid the background with a hot yellow to really complement all that smoky purple back there, and then warmed up her face to harmonize the overall color palette. Remember, we first want balance and then we want harmony. That's what elevates a painting. Finally, after some texture overlays and extra sharpness around the eyes, hair and jewelry, here's our finished painting. I super love the theme and the colors, and I really feel like this style has helped me mature as an artist. What do you think? And there we have it, Huang Guangjian demystified. Mate, the way those textures scratch and itch in my brain, they are definitely coming with me moving forward. But what was your biggest takeaway from the study? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much again to UU_8, Obama Digital 5239, Loki XIII 4942, and ETAM1343 for requesting this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it and that it was everything you were looking for. And if the rest of you guys enjoyed this video as well, make sure to let me know by giving it a big thumbs up and subscribing to my channel for even more style studies in the future. You can come say hello on socials, all my links are in the description. And by the way, I didn't post on YouTube for a couple weeks while I was ill, but my patrons have been getting rewards this whole time, including both the paintings that I made for this video, the complete step-by-steps and speed paints. So if you want to grab those and keep up with everything that I do in real time, as well as grab extra rewards such as my complete brush kit that I made from scratch, which has over like 60 brushes, all of the speed paints for all of my art so far, prints of my work every few months, and also my complete collection of real-time paint-along style tutorials. It is all up on Patreon, and your support on them means the whole entire world to me. So the link is up here and in the description, and thank you so much for checking it out. Finally, are there other artists you'd like me to do a style study on in the future? First, check out my style study playlist. It should show up here in the outro in just a sec. I've done so many of these, and chances are I've probably covered some of your faves on the series already. But if I haven't, then feel free to leave me a comment below or come tell me on my Discord server, and I'll probably add your artist to my ever-growing list. Alrighty you guys, this has been a long one, so thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I really hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Check out some more style studies down here, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!